right, thanks speakers, and thank you all for being here. I'd now like to invite Dr. Kirk Johnson, the Sant Director of the National Museum of Natural History, to the podium for some concluding remarks.
Thanks, Eric, and thank you all speakers. You can stay there if you want. You don't have to scoot off the podium just yet. I don't bite. Very stimulating meeting. I missed the first talk because I was off at a museum thing, as we often have to do as museum directors. But I want to thank the organizers of the Symposium, the U.S. Botanic Gardens and the Department of Botany here, and all the speakers. I think I was really excited about this symposium because in my mind, there is no place more important in the world right now than the neotropical forests. I mean, you think about the Amazon basin and the surrounding montane regions and all the biological diversity that's there. And it's one of the places in the world where it's a massively large biologic hotspot, also sitting on top of a climatically important tipping point zone. And if we don't work to save the Amazon basin and the biodiversity in the surrounding areas, we're going to lose the planet. And it's also the most sort of intoxicatingly interesting place in the world because of that diversity that we see. And it was so great to see just the pieces of it here today. So I think in thinking about the role that museums play in this a large piece, obviously, you know, we have the collections in your area, and we have the scientists and the scholars and the students and the visitors. But we play this massive role of communication. But one thing that museums have not been doing yet, and I hope we do start doing, is working together in a sort of network of museums. You think about it, museum scientists collaborate with other museum scientists. There's lots of scientist-to-scientist collaborations. There's very few museum-to-museum collaborations. You rarely see museum directors getting together with other museum directors and saying, what's the role of the museum, not just in the science and the preservation of the collections, but also in the realm of amplifying our impact by combining our efforts. And we just published a paper in Science on March 24th where we looked at the 73 of the world's largest museums, and the paper had 156 authors from 28 countries. The goal was to get both the directors of the museums to be authors as well as the scientists, because the directors at the end of the day are the one that control the resources and make the decisions that can accelerate change in museums, not just in the collections and research space, but also in the communications and outreach space. I love the double Alejandras that we had today. Alejandra number 1, which told us to tell stories of plants, and Alejandra number 2 that said scientists can change the world, but we have to stop talking only to ourselves. And I think that's a message. You still have to talk to yourselves in meetings like this because it's really important to know what you're doing and to also communicate your science, but it's really important that you are developing the skills of communication and the modes of communication, and that's really not your job. We need to help you do that in museum context. We need to help you have those tools. We're trying to do that, I think, because at the end of the day, you're the experts, and it's one thing for someone to say biodiversity, and it's another thing to somebody show you the difference between 50 species of piper. So it's like a really important thing to know, and biodiversity is so incredibly complex. I walked by this great poster that Vicky Funk and colleagues made on the wall of like the 23,000 species of Asteraceae in that one cladogram. I walk past it every single day, and every time I walk past it with a civilian, I point it out and say, this is what biodiversity is. There's 23,000 species of Asteraceae, and they're related to each other, and we know the stories of these things because we can tell from all our science. And can you imagine that one person actually figured this thing out? So it's super important that you keep doing what you're doing. One of the traumas of being a museum director is I don't get to be a scientist as much anymore, and I'm a paleobotanist, so I appreciate all the fine comments about paleobotany that were made on the stage. It's always important to have the opinion of a paleobotanist, and paleobotany is pretty amazing because it tells you things you just can't find out any other way, but the problem is the record is quite spotty. You know, we'd love to have kind of the coverage of the planet in paleobotany that we have in botany, but we don't, but it's quite possible to dig more holes, and so I urge people to dig more holes. 35 years ago, I started my career by mapping a hectare of tropical rainforest in northern Australia, And then I was a paleobotanist, but I just wanted to see what a tropical rainforest felt like. So I worked for CSIRO and mapped a hectare of rainforest and measured its 90 different species and mapped all the trees. And the next year I went to South America and started working on the fossil plants of Argentina. And to my amazement, I found Australian species in the Eocene of Patagonia. We have the first eucalyptus, for instance, and we have really amazing, it was a whole bunch of different Proteaceae and things. And I'd just seen those things growing in northern Australia, and there they were in the ground in Argentina. And that really made me start to wonder, where in the world did the tropical rainforests of South America come from? Because the connection from the south was really an Australasian kind of thing. And then to hear Greg Stoll talk about the sort of boreal tropical thing, or those things in North America that came from Asia around the top. So sort of the central part of South America is in a pincher between Asia on the south and Asia on the north, which really makes me wonder about where the tropical, neotropical forests of Central and South America came from and when they got there. It's sort of an open, unknown question as far as I can understand. In 1994, when I was working at the Denver Museum, we found a tropical rainforest fossil site in Castle Rock, Colorado at latitude 39 that had 150 species and a number of boreotropical things. But it was a proper rainforest. It had broad, really large leaves and palms and ferns and cycads, super high diversity, had all the attributes of a tropical rainforest. And then Carlos Jaramillo and team found the Cerrejón flores of northern Colombia at 60 million years. So you can see some sort of inklings of where things are starting to happen. But boy, that's an untold story that really needs to be inspected further. And there's some good news in that front. In 2 weeks, they're starting the Pan-Amazonian drilling project to do a series of 4 cores across the Amazonian basin and drill and study the pollinology. And part of it's sort of a collaboration of many, many different organizations. But here at this building, we've just acquired an amazing pollinological setup that actually can scan pollinology slides and get the entire slide and do the stacked images. And we're going to be working with Carlos Jaramillo at STRI and basically digitizing the entire pollinological slide collection and talk about data. And that's where a lot of paleobotanical data lives. It's been largely inaccessible. We also are working, the Smithsonian is doing some pretty interesting things. We were successful here in completely digitizing our entire herbarium, which I think is a tool that's going to be really important moving forward. And just last Friday upstairs, Christian Samper, who was the former director of the museum here and now working with the Bezos Group, gave a $12 million gift to Forest Geo, which is the originally Smithsonian-led coalition of what is now, I think, 70 forest plots across the world. And the money came to support the development of tools to understand the flow of carbon in tropical rainforests. And I think that's one avenue that's going to be very important for botanists to think about, is that the carbon markets going to emerge in the future are going to depend in some part about our ability to measure and understand forests really well. And that may be partially the tool that helps us start to save rainforests when people start investing in them as a way to keep carbon in the ground and not in the air. So I think there's some really positive things moving forward that we can think about how we can be hopeful. But it all is kind of grounded in the science on the ground. So it's just a pleasure for me to sit here and watch everyone talk about what they were doing in those incredible forests in the Neotropic. So thank you very much for coming. We're going to be marching off and having a nice reception at the U.S. Botanic Gardens. We can all chat with each other, and I'll be there. So look forward to chatting with you. Thanks so much for today.